Hey, do you want to know how to stop codependence with men? Hey, I'm Antia Boyd, creator of the Magnetize The Man Method, and let's go ahead and dive right in. Now, you have to understand codependence is really originated from focusing on the other person, right? So therefore, the first step is to start focusing on yourself, right? Become actually selfish. Actually become a little bit a narcissist inside of yourself that you're resisting so much, right? So that means become more connected to all of the parts that you are, coming home to yourself, inviting the other person to actually come to you, right? Come into your energy field, right? Actually serving your agenda versus you pretending you want to serve their agenda, right? So you actually get fulfilled and hopefully get back, like the benefits, right? And like their resources, which of course you can't fully count on, right? And then the next piece is allowing yourself to simply be. Now, what do I mean by that? So codependence really happens from being in reaction all the time, right? Like let's say, you're maybe you're like always the little girl, right? And like your man is always like the rescuer, right? And the codependence happens because he starts to feel guilty when he's not a rescuer, right? And also the codependence happens because, for example, you are then not able to source yourself, right? You're not able to resource your inner little girl. Now, what I mean by the inner little girl is that young part inside of you that's very playful, but it's also extremely wounded as well, right? It was like 2 years old, 1 year old when the wounding happened, when she really disconnected from her own core and decided that she's going to focus on somebody else's core and making them happy because she didn't feel like really connected to her core, and her core is almost like non-existent, right? So she doesn't even know what is home. Is anyone home? And when she focuses on herself, she actually feels rather empty, right? So it's really the invitation to simply be with that emotion, with like feeling potentially forgotten, with feeling abandoned, with feeling helpless and powerless. I think that's like a big piece when you're in a codependent pattern, right? Because otherwise you have this like pseudo empowerment that's not really an empowerment, if you know what I mean, right? Because you're not really empowering yourself because you're depending on the other person to provide the empowerment for you versus you are able to empower yourself. And what that also means, another thing you have to understand is then you're actually putting yourselves in identities, right? So you can only show up in a little girl, right? And maybe your man can only show up in, let's say, the hero, right? But he can never be, let's say, in his inner boy, right? Because you can source yourself enough to be in maybe your inner mother, right? To actually take care of his inner boy, right? Which again, this is this young part inside of him that also needs healing, right? And that also wants attention, and that also wants to know that he's supported and that he's protected, that he doesn't want to just let you know this all the time. And look, that's why so many divorces are happening, because oftentimes more than one archetype in the marriage is being massively neglected, right? And what then happens, it's like out of the sudden it blows out, right? There was the suppression all the time, and out of the sudden the inner boy comes out, right? And lots of men or women too, right, have midlife crises. What do you think that is, right? Like part of it is that actually all the parts come out to play that were always just like causing and really nurturing and functioning, right? Like in a certain pattern, and never had freedom to truly like break out of it, really break out of it, right? And then tip number 3 to break out of codependence with men is actually connecting with all of your emotions, right? So maybe you're really good to connect with anger and rage and fury and right? And just really like this rage much just comes out of you, but you actually have a really hard time to be with your soft grief, your sadness, your femininity, right? Your flow, right? Or maybe it's the other way around. You're really good with the grief, the sadness, and you actually make men feel guilty all the time, right? Because I feel like they did something wrong, and you might do this unconsciously, and you never really, instead of like you're being angry at yourself, but you're not really stepping into that assertiveness and be angry, right? And come in, be embodied, and use your voice, right? And use your power in that sense, right? So it's either just love or it's power, but it's not both. So you want to make sure you integrate both together, right? So you can show up as an integrated being that's highly interdependent with yourself. Does that make sense? Highly independent with yourself, so you can be truly interdependent in your relationship with men. And then you might be like, well, what about Antia? Like, you're just talking about me. What about the men? Well, the man will shift automatically, because every time when you shift the dynamic, guess what happens? The other person has to shift, because you're no longer fulfilling your part of the dynamic that he would need in order to fulfill that ongoing pattern, right? So if that's really a lean-in for you and you're just really fired up about it, but you don't quite know how to put the puzzle pieces together, I invite you to come on a Magnetize the Man clarity call with me, where we get crystal clear what are the unconscious sabotaging patterns that you use, right? What particular emotional patterns do you go into? Which ones do you avoid in order to be protected or in order to be safe, right? And whatever it is, the function that it fulfills. So we're going to look at that and create an action plan for you. So for that, hop on over to magnetizetheman.com, magnetizetheman.com, and grab your slot. Happy to talk to you then. Have a beautiful rest of your day. And don't forget, dreams do come true.